Professor Carlisi, welcome to the show.
Hi, please call me Lydia.
Now, one of the most interesting aspects of this whole Partimento and Neapolitan wave of musicological research and historical performance is the fact that I found it really fascinating that the Paris Conservatory is really heavily influenced by the Neapolitan conservatories of Italy. And you're an expert in this area. Let's just talk a little bit about that. Let's frame it, first of all, for my audience. The Paris Conservatory, when was it founded?
Well, actually, I have to say something first because we are using the word Paris Conservatory, the Conservatoire, but actually we are talking about several institutions that changed name and structure during the years. So let's say the first public school of music, which was not attached to a church, was the École Royale des Chants et de Déclamation. It was founded in 1784. And this school was mainly aimed to create singers, to build singers for the court. France was a monarchy, and they had lots of musicians working there. And they wanted also to have singers who were trained in France. So they created the school at the time. And actually, the main purpose of the school was to create a school like the Neapolitan conservatories.
Are you saying that Italian music was very influential in France at the time?
Yes, absolutely. If we think at the time, there was also a theater for Italian operas, the Comédie Italienne, Italian operas and also theater. And many Italian musicians were working in Paris. They were also, like if we think of Piccinni was invited by Marie Antoinette to work there as a composer. And of course, he was also teaching, giving singing lessons and teaching music. So of course, the French had a great admiration for Italian music and Italian musicians. And that was why they wanted to create this school, to have their own French musicians as good as the Italians.
Did France have its own music tradition separate from Italy?
Yes, of course it did, but it was, of course, very attached at the time to the court and the church. But the best musicians were at the time Italian, as we know, and this also comes from the Neapolitan tradition. We have a history, as you already talk about this with other guests, we have a history of Neapolitan-trained musicians who moved to Europe, to other parts, because they were working there as Kapellmeister in Germany or in Austria or in France too.
Let's talk now about the founding of the Conservatoire. So you're saying it was separate institutions. How did it come to be that they decided, okay, let's now have a single institution for the training of music? And you mentioned they wanted better singers, right, initially?
There were several institutions during the years. That means it was one institution who changed name and structure during the years. So at the first institution was the École Royale des Chants et Déclamation, and then the French Revolution came. So they transformed it into a military music school, and then it became in 1795 the Conservatoire. And then it changed again later to other institutions.
Right.
But today, for the purpose of this interview, we can just refer to it as the Conservatoire. So it's easier for everybody.
Right.
To know.
Now, something happened in 1799.
Yeah, actually, yes. Well, 1799 is actually the year of the Neapolitan Revolution, because there was also, Naples was also a monarchy. It was under the Spanish monarchy. And after the French Revolution, in Naples, there was also this revolution. They tried to create a Neapolitan Republic, which lasted only a few months, and then it failed. But after this failure, all the people who were tied to this revolution were sent abroad. They had to flee. And among these, many musicians fled to Paris. So this brought away, we can talk about this, of course. Emanuele Imbimbo was one of those, and he was the editor of Feneroli's Partimenti in France.
Was he trained at Naples, and can you just talk about his training and a brief biography of him?
Yes, of course. Well, he actually was a lawyer because his family, he came from this family of lawyers. So, of course, he had to study law. He also studied music with Sigismondo, who, I don't know if you are aware, he was the librarian at the Neapolitan Conservatorio. So he didn't have an actually professional training in music. But he, from what we know from Sigismondo's testimony, he was a very good singer. So he was also a good musician. He had to go to Paris, of course, after this revolution. And there he started working as a singing teacher, as a matter of fact. And he worked together with Raffaele Carli, who was also a Neapolitan living in Paris, and he was an editor. And they published these 2 editions of Feneroli's Partimenti together. And we also know that he was in touch with Feneroli, that Feneroli also sent him some new Partimenti to add to his 2nd edition. So we do know that the material was kind of approved by Feneroli.
Some of my guests have mentioned that Feneroli's books were very famous around Europe. So is this an example of his books being disseminated into another country like France?
Yes, absolutely. And this French edition actually made it very easy for the French audience to get in touch with Partimenti. Because what Imbimbo did, he added an introduction and some written parts, some texts about some theoretical matters that are not in the original Partimenti books. As we know, Partimenti rules and exercises do not contain many instructions, no?
Right. That's true.
Yeah,
it's a mystery.
What Imbimbo he did add some kind of explanations and also some theoretical concepts that were usually not normal in a Neapolitan set of Partimenti. But also it's very funny if you read this introduction, because now and then he just writes, okay, this is really nice, this theory. He also uses like chord inversions, and he explains how chord inversions are made, all French theory. And then he just says, but the old masters in Naples didn't do much of this stuff. They just wanted to do the practice because the music is in practice. And so here are the exercises. And just goes back to the to the practical parts of the book.
Now, the French music theory you're talking about Rameau, right?
Yes, of course, with others, of course, and Rameau's reception, of course. Yeah, Ludwig Holtmeier wrote a book about all the reception of Rameau.
Okay, now let's talk about the founders of the Paris Conservatory. So there's an interesting person who is Honoré Langlé. Could you talk about that person? Was he a student or was he a Neapolitan-trained musician?
Yeah, he was a Neapolitan-trained musician. He was one of the students. You know, in Naples, there were, of course, the orphans, and also some students who paid a fee to study at the conservatories. And he was one of these paying students. He studied in Naples, and then he went back to Paris, and he became one of the founders of the Paris Conservatoire, actually. So we can say that he did have a Neapolitan training.
So that is a direct connection there. Was there also, now the name Niccolò Piccinni, right, that you mentioned earlier, was he the first head of the school?
Yes, he was the primo maestro, le premier maître. They used actually the same name for the teaching position.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, at the beginning it was really clear that they was trying to just create a Neapolitan conservatory in Paris.
Right.
So Piccinni he studied with Leo and Durante. And then, as I said, he moved to Paris, where he was working at the theater, composing as a composer. And then he took this position at the École des Chants et d'Acclamation, the conservatory. And he basically stayed there until the revolution. Then he had to go away. He had to go back to Naples when they closed the school.
You could maybe help me with the timeline here. Is it true that the French government actually sent 2 people to Naples to kind of get musical materials and scores and that kind of thing?
Yes, it is true. Actually, it was Napoleon who created a commission after he started invading Europe,
right.
as you said before.
What year was that? I'm not a history person, but...
Well, I know that, the year of the invasions, I don't know exactly, but I know that the first commission was created in 1796.
Okay.
So he created this commission to select art pieces and science objects to be taken to France, because he wanted to create the biggest collection of art in the world in Paris. So Rodolphe Kreutzer, who was a violinist and professor at the Conservatoire, was chosen as musician to do this. And he went twice to 2 expeditions in Italy, and he didn't even only go to Naples. He went to Milan, he went to Venice, Bologna, Rome, collecting basically scores. This is what, and the main purpose of this trip was to create a library of music at the Paris Conservatoire that would contain all of this music that would be an example for the students. So they had to learn from the best music. And my colleague Giulia Giovani, who also worked with me in Bern at creating the Neapolitan Canon project, she's writing a book about these exchanges between Naples and Paris, and especially on the building of this library in Paris. And she also tried to reconstruct what kind of music they were taking back to Paris. And we know that, for example, that Cherubini, who also was in Paris, he asked the government to go to send these people to Bologna to get the collection of the library of Padre Martini. And this didn't work because the collection of Padre Martini is still in Bologna now, only because a student of Padre Martini took away these books and kept them safe from the invasion.
Wow.
Exactly. But what happened that they obtained some copies of some scores, so at least they didn't take the originals, but they got some copies. And when they went to Naples, they went twice to Naples, they also managed to get several copies of operas and music and from the great composers, Neapolitan and mainly Italian composers. So we're talking about all kinds of music in the years, like starting from Palestrina, Pergolesi, Monteverdi, and going on to Jommelli, Durante.
That's amazing. Okay, so let me ask you, definitely the Italian link is very strong. But to be fair, did the Paris Conservatory, were they interested in perhaps German music as well? Do they have German, was it all mainly Italian?
It was mainly Italian, of course, but of course the German composers were also well known, and Austrian too. Of course, they knew Mozart, they knew Beethoven. It's later on I'm talking about, of course. And yes, of course, they did know these composers. And I also saw some documents. They also had German musicians playing in orchestras in France, not only Italians.
Okay, so now let's jump to, there's a person, Gaspare Selvaggi.
Yeah.
And can you talk to me about this person? So he was an amateur, but didn't he have a massive collection of manuscripts of Neapolitan composers?
Yes, he did. He did have a very big collection. He was a clerical, and he was traveling a lot. He was also in Paris for a while. And he was, from what we know, he was trying to sell this collection. And he sold a part of his collection is in London in the British Library, because he sold into the Marquis of Northampton. And then he sold another part of his collection with Durante's manuscript to Paris Conservatoire. So this collection is now in Paris.
Would it be normal for amateur musicians or enthusiasts to have a lot of these Italian manuscripts back in the day and everybody's collecting them because they were hot property?
Well, I think, there were professional musicians and amateurs who actually had a really good training in music. As we know, Imbimbo was also, if he wasn't a professional musician, but he did have a good training. Choron himself also wasn't a professional musician, but they were all people who had a deep understanding of music. And I think it is quite fair that they did have a collection of music books in the library.
Now let's talk about the conservatory's pedagogy and the way, now I know you mentioned they modeled after the Neapolitan conservatories. Now it's similar, right? Because they do 10 years of instruction. Debussy went in for 10 years, much like the Italian conservatories. Let's get into the details now. So I know from my previous guests, partimenti exercises and solfeggio were kind of the foundations of the Neapolitan approach. Is that similar to the Paris Conservatory?
Well, here something happened, because when the new conservatory in 1795 was built, there was a kind of change of path. It was after the French Revolution, and France needed to create a new national identity. So what they did is that they asked the teachers at the Conservatoire to create their own methods. So these teachers had to write a book containing all their teaching materials. And for what's concerning theory, of course, we have the solfeggi, the principe elementaire that contains the solfeggi. But what is interesting is that these solfeggi are not Neapolitan solfeggi. They are solfeggi composed by the teachers, which, of course, Langlé was one of them. So they are very similar to Neapolitan solfeggi, but they are not original solfeggi. And then we also have the Traité d'harmonie, so the harmony book that contains what we could recognize as partimento rules, but no mention to partimenti is made or to Neapolitan teachers. But what we also know, doing archival research, we can see that there were some documents of the conservators and administration's documents where they actually were buying the Solfège d'Italie, so the collections of solfeggi that are full of Neapolitan solfeggi, of course, and they were buying this French edition of Neapolitan Partimenti made by Imbimbo, so Feneroli's Partimenti. So what is clear that officially they did have the method, so these books written by the professors, but on the side, they were allowed to use other materials. This is clear from the rules that they had. And this material is, in fact, Neapolitan solfeggi and partimenti.
Now, wait, you said that they did the solfeggi differently. Now, did they approach solfeggio in a different way compared to the Neapolitans?
Yes, actually they did. And I think this is the key of my part of my research, because I think this is one of the elements that made the French, let's call it French method, different than the Neapolitan and less effective. Because actually in the Neapolitan school, so in the Conservatory in Naples, each student had to learn partimenti, they had to sing solfeggi and learn counterpoint. So these solfeggi, in the Neapolitan solfeggi, they have a melody and they are written on top of a partimento base. So you will find the same models that you find in the partimento with a melody on top. And this is very important because it allows the students to learn melody patterns. In Paris, solfeggi were mainly used for singing students, but not all singers used to study accompaniment. So they were separated. Not each student didn't have the complete package of training, solfeggio and partimento. And counterpoint was only for composers. So if a student would go there as a singer, he would sing Italian solfeggi, arie, and all these beautiful pieces. Just learn a little bit of keyboard knowledge, but probably will not learn enough partimento to learn these models and to learn how to compose and improvise.
Oh,
so that,
wow!
I think this was the main difference between the two schools.
Okay, so that really is amazing to me, because that kind of separation, and wasn't the Paris Conservatory itself copied by other institutions around Europe?
Exactly, yes, and I think this is actually the reason why we kind of lost this tradition, because of course Naples started to, because of political reasons, the conservatories started closing, so the tradition was kind of lost, dying, or it remained enclosed in a small circle no, in Naples. And the Paris Conservatory was the model of other conservatories in Europe and also in the world. So they took this model they followed this method, which was the new French method, let's call it like that.
Wow, so they
And of
really
course,
separated so many topics into different
yes.
minor topics, and you never really, if you were perhaps only a singer, you might have never done counterpoint, or you might have never have done keyboard. That's amazing.
Absolutely. And if you were a composer, you probably never had singen enough solfeggi to learn.
Oh, suddenly everything seems so clear to me now, thanks to you. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about, I want to go into the people now. So we mentioned Cherubini, right? So Cherubini, who, by the way, didn't Beethoven call him like the greatest composer alive at the time or something? Like, he really admired Cherubini. And so can we talk a little bit about Cherubini's background and like his training and what his influences were?
Yeah, he actually was one of the most important people at the time, working at the time. He studied in Bologna with Sarti. Sarti was a student of Padre Martini. Sarti used Leo and Durante's partimenti to teach, and also counterpoint, of course. And so Cherubini had a typical Italian training, let's call it like that. He then moved to Paris, and in 1822 he was elected director of the Conservatoire. That at the time it was the École Royale de Musique. Also a new name for the school, as I was saying before. Yeah. Well, he in 1822, it was like 30, 40 years since the foundation of this school. No? So, and the situation was quite catastrophic, I have to say. We have testimonies of people complaining about the quality of French singers that really could not be compared to Italian singers. Like there's a very funny quotation of Choron, who once said to one of his students, "Tu chantes comme au conservatoire." You sing like at the conservatoire, which is it's not very nice. Yeah, exactly. So from these things, we can understand that this method wasn't working quite well. So when
who was in charge at that time?
Before, there were different directions, but in 1822, Cherubini took the direction, and he said, okay, now we have to do something to try to save this situation. And what he did, he just said, okay, let's go back to the original tradition. So what he did, first of all, he allowed students to live in the Conservatoire, which before wasn't allowed. And as you know, in Naples, the students, the children used to live inside the Conservatorio because they didn't have any other option. But in France, the Conservatoire wasn't an orphanage. It was a school with the goal to create entertainers. So it was quite different, no? So the students didn't need to live there. They had their own homes and their families, perhaps. So what he created this pensionnat where the students could live and just focus on music, because he thought that once the student left the Conservatoire, then he got distracted by other things. So this was the first action. Then he decided to reunite harmony lessons and accompaniment lessons. So because he saw that this separation of partimenti being treated like a written composition exercises didn't work, of course. So he did reunite the classes, and he created this accompaniment, harmonie pratique it's called. So it is practical harmony on the keyboard. And so this was the first step. And there were also the concours, so what they called, I can remember the word in English. The students had to do like a competition. Yes, it was a competition. And there was a competition of practical harmony too. So they had to improvise with a bass.
Oh, that's like partimenti.
Exactly. And Cherubini composed lots of partimenti basses. I call them partimenti because they are very, very similar to partimenti. And these were used for these competitions. So Cherubini was really, really important for this change in the Paris Conservatoire, because he tried to fix what wasn't working at the time.
That leads me to one question, which is, did you see the word partimenti in any of these texts, in these French texts?
Not until 1846.
Wow. They really wanted the French stamp on it.
Well, apart from, of course, Feneroli's, in Bimbo's edition of Feneroli's Partimento, of course, that was earlier. No? But there is, in 1846, one of the teachers, the professors of the Conservatory, wrote a book that is called Partimenti.
Oh.
And his name was Collet. And what I found that starting from this point, like middle 19th century, there is a revival of partimenti. It's suddenly everybody is talking about this.
Wait, did you say the middle of the 19th century? I thought that's when it died.
Yeah, in France. I'm saying in France. I mean in Paris.
So it died in Italy and it was reborn in France?
Exactly. But the problem is, from what I see in my research, that they really didn't use them as they were supposed to. So
tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, as I said before, apart from this separation from solfeggi and counterpoint, they were treated mainly as accompaniment bases.
So I see. Just chords.
Yeah. Exactly. So imitation, all these elements were not treated, at least not in these sources. They do have some fugue partimenti, some kind of fugal themes. But they are not contained in these books. They are separated. Like Cherubini had some too. But it seems, from where I'm now, I'm still working on it. So maybe I can tell you more later. But it seems that they are just used as accompaniment exercises.
Right. Now, let's talk about counterpoint. So you mentioned that was maybe only reserved for composers. Did they learn counterpoint the partimento Italian way, or did they learn it more of a Fuchs way?
Yeah, no, Fuchs, definitely. Written. They actually, then in France, they took it to 11 that it was the fugue scolaire, so it was completely separated from the style fugue, and it just brought to an exercise. So yeah, it was just following rules and writing the exercises.
You mentioned, Sharon, his Principles of Composition d'Italie. It actually uses as a source Nicola Sala's rules of counterpoint. And so how is Choron's influence on the Paris Conservatory? I mean, he released that book commercially, right, for just people to buy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Now, Choron was separated from the conservatory. He had his own school, which was tied to a church, actually. And his collection was not used in the school or for didactical purpose, because as we said, it was a very. I saw this book in Paris. It's a really big book. It's not possible to just use it like on a piano and just look at it. It's really like just a collection book. And yes, so he wasn't actually working with the conservatory.
Let's talk about some of the teachers at the conservatory. You mentioned they were writing their own exercises. There was one mention of Fétis, who used Feneroli. Is that right? He used Feneroli, but what was his critical opinion of Feneroli? And was Partimenti, was it viewed as old-fashioned or incomplete in a way?
Yeah, exactly. Well, of course, the first critic is that these Partimento books didn't contain any instructions. So, as we said before, it seems that the French needed instructions at the time to understand these exercises. And Fétis says that, and of course, he said they are all old style, that you should follow new things. But he was professor of composition at the École Royale, and he wrote a méthode élémentaire, which contains actually partimenti, Sala, Feneroli, Durante. So he did use them because he also recognized that they are the best exercises to be used. And so it's kind of controversy. He was critic from a theoretical point of view, let's say, But he also appreciated the value of these exercises.
Can I ask you, with regard to harmony, since there were harmony professors there, did they use the rules, the regole, that the Furno and the Feneroli, did they use those rules in terms of their harmony with their bass motions and dissonances and that kind of thing?
Well, if we look at Catel had wrote the method for harmony, no, traité d'harmonie. And he used all these things. His method is full of bass motions, all these sequences and regole, basically. Although he never mentions partimenti.
That political thing, it really bothers me, I guess. Now, let's talk about singing now. So these tracks were very separated. I want to talk about improvisation, because improvisation is really at the core of that Neapolitan tradition. Did that still retain in the Paris Conservatory? Because I've some people have told me that even then improvisation started to fade away if you weren't a composer or not a virtuoso or something.
Yeah, it seems so. It seemed that only if you were like an accompanist, you could improvise. But also another difference that we see, that we know that many Neapolitan partimenti are without numbers. No, and if we look at a basso continuo of a Neapolitan piece, there are often no numbers on it. In France, there are always numbers. So this can tell us a lot on the skills, on the improvisation skill. It seems that French needed numbers to realize.
And then the Neapolitan tradition, it's all blank, basically, right? That's very interesting. And but nowadays we know that we don't have any more living masters of this oral tradition that is partimento. But we had Piccinni, right, back in the day. Cherubini, they were familiar with all of this. They knew. They were kind of like living masters. Did that whole tradition, that oral tradition, disappear? And could we pinpoint how it who is responsible really? Talking about a particular person for splitting all of these subjects.
It's hard to say, because just at the beginning, the first school that was created in 1784, even then, they were really focused on singing lessons. So they started teaching lots of Italian music, singing compositions, basically, arie and solfeggi, but it doesn't seem that accompaniment has a really big role in this education. So I think it just started from the beginning.
I do believe Debussy graduated in accompaniment, right? I think that was his major, if I'm not mistaken. So they didn't really use the word partimenti, but would it be fair to say that somebody like Debussy, when he was studying accompaniment, would have really practiced in a way partimenti, quote unquote?
Yes, I suppose. Of course, the hard thing to do in this kind of research is we have no direct testimony, and no time machine to go there and see. It would be really nice, but unfortunately, we do not have any. We can only try to reconstruct what from the documents we find what was happening there. Of course, we know that at the time there was classes of accompaniment. So they did learn how to accompany and improvise on a bass, and maybe partimenti, but used in a vertical way. But it's hard to say to what level they were doing this, because we do not know very well what was going on. Right,
and if I could just mention, particularly about accompaniment. What is that? What is that really? What would they be practicing if they'd be practicing accompaniment? Is it just chords? Because we know the French organ tradition is they do improvise. So what would they be practicing in accompaniment?
Well, from the books that we have that were used, material that was used at the conservatory, we do see. At the moment, I found basses with numbers. And this is what I have found. Of course, if you're talking about organist, it seems that the organist had another kind of tradition that was separate from all the rest. There are no big treatises until later on in the 19th century. The first written instructions for organists come, but earlier there is quite nothing. I tried to investigate this when I was in Paris. I talked to lots of organists there, but they all said there is unfortunately no documentation on how they learned this. They think that just the teacher was given instructions, just do like this, just do when you. So it's very hard to say what they were doing until the mid 19th century, where of course there are more information. But it's like blank. It's really complicated to say.
Okay, and now let's talk about Charles Simon Catel. You mentioned him earlier. His harmony textbook, was that like a major textbook that they used for many years? Did they? Let's actually talk about the particular books that they used. So, could you mention a few of them that were important in the Paris Conservatory?
They were the official methods of the Paris Conservatoire. So they have the principe élémentaire, which is the basic knowledge of music that contains, of course, basic music theory and solfeggi. So they had to sing these exercises, and then they had the traité d'harmonie, which contains all information about chords, chord inversions, and also all these sequences, patterns, what we would call also regole in the partimento tradition.
And that's very French, right? In the way that they have chords and the way they explain it. So did the Catel book kind of rub out all the Neapolitan kind of explanation and replace it with French kind of look, a French view of this, the rules of music?
Well, it's a mix, actually. You can find both. You can find both things. You can find explanation on the chords and how the chords are created, and then you also have a part where there are actually these exercises that are basically partimenti. So it's like a mix of both.
Is because I know the German music theory comes in later, but did they use Roman numerals in the Paris Conservatory when talking about chords?
Not yet. That comes later.
How do they write out chords then? Do they just spell it out on the staff?
With the numbers, 6 chords.
Oh, I see. Okay. So they'd have the bass note and then they'd have the underneath, like figures basically. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I get it. Yeah. Okay. How about we now talk today for today in the 21st century, and now the new movement. And I know you teach at the Menti Party, which is just a fabulous summer program for people who are interested in the Neapolitan tradition. And so, what can you just tell me? What do you teach the students at the Menti Party? Your role?
I teach composition at Menti Party, or in a practical way to explain this, I teach these kids or adults who can beautifully improvise how to write down the music that they improvise, which is not automatic, you know. So especially there are lots of, especially when we talk about children who have often no previous musical knowledge, they never, some of them never got the chance to write down their music. So what I do is we work on partimenti models, and it depends on the level of the student, of course. And I try to teach them how to write them down in a correct way, following voice leading and counterpoint rules, and also how to compose a piece using these models. It's kind of the next step, going from the improvisation to the composition.
If I could ask, how is the partimenti composition class different from perhaps mainstream composition?
Well, of course, with partimenti, you learn lots of schemata, the models, and you have to basically learn how to put them together to make them work in a piece. So apart from the schemes and how to create a good melody, I also teach like some elements of form, so how to create a structure of a whole piece. I think it's very important because when you improvise in a free improvisation, you don't always have an idea of a structure. So I think it's very important, especially in a written composition, you have to have some kind of foundation for your ideas.
What advice can you give to people who are interested in perhaps developing their compositional training? I mean, short of going to Menti Party and training with you, what can my audience do? What books can you recommend? Maybe what things should they work on if they want to start working on composition?
Well, of course, we are talking, of course, of this kind of composition, not contemporary music. Of course, we're talking a partimento style composition, so galant style, basically. So, of course, the classical books that you can read are Robert Gierdingen's Music in the Galant Style, or Giorgio Sanguinetti's book is also full of partimento models that can be used. And what I would also suggest is to look at the music of the time. Take a look at the scores, listen to lots of music, and try to familiarize on how, and some kind of stylistic items of the music of the time, because sometimes these things are very characteristic of this music, and it's important to learn them. It's like a language, you learn how to speak this language.
How do you work on, what's your advice for improving your written counterpoint?
Well, good question. This is like, I think you need some foundation, of course, of counterpoint. So start with the basics. And then
wait, hold on a second. What does that mean? Start with the basics. You have to really walk me here. Be very gentle here.
Well, if I may suggest a book, Peter Schubert has a book. It's called The Modal Counterpoint, which is it goes step by step into counterpoint. And for people who are just starting to study counterpoint, I think it's a very good book, because the difficulty increases very slowly, and you can really work on exercises and elements inside it. So I think it's a very good way to start and build a foundation counterpoint. And then if we're talking about, of course, I mainly use partimento also as a method of using counterpoint. Of course, that's we're not talking about strict counterpoint and Fuchs later on. If your goal is to compose in the galant style, you have to switch to partimenti and start using all the dissonances rules. So you will start like the 7/6 patterns and all these patterns that you can find also in Feneroli's book. And then you would have to start diminutions and imitations, which is, of course, very important. Imitations you can also learn in traditional Renaissance counterpoint, but also in partimenti. So the art of using and reusing material.
This might be a pretty dumb question, but is Renaissance counterpoint different from galant style counterpoint? Let's say, like, if you do the Peter Schubert, that modal book, modal counterpoint, is that counterpoint still absolutely good for the galant style?
Well, it's good because you learn the rules, the foundation of voice leading and the strict rules. So in that way, it's something that you build on, in my opinion. It's like you need a foundation, and this would be this Renaissance counterpoint, and then you go on building on this.
Is the partimento counterpoint, is that considered not strict?
Well, it is strict in a way that there are rules. No, so each dissonance has to be prepared sound and then resolved. Now, of course, this is a rule that cannot be exempted from. So there are, of course, rules that you have to follow, but it's a very different style. It's the concept of tonality is very different, of course, because we are talking of modal music and not tonal music. So, of course, it's a different context. But I think it is important to learn some voice leading rules that will help you later build on your composition.
Okay, so I interrupted you. So just to be clear, you said the basics, and then you mentioned dissonances, then diminution imitation. And then after diminution imitation, does that lead to canons and fugues? Was fugues at the end? Is that?
Yeah, fugues are at the end of the partimento-trained, and of course you can also do this. If you do, it depends on how much Renaissance counterpoint you do, because also you learn also how to start. It's like the beginning of the fugue style. It's quite different as the Baroque fugue, of course. but you do start learning some kind of foundation, how to like write an answer. So you have a soggetto, risposta, and a subject and an answer. That's what I mean, that it's a good foundation, because you learn all these things that later develop into something else, following different rules, of course, because the Baroque counterpoint is quite different. And in the partimento training, fugues come at the end, of course, because they are quite different. And improvise a fugue is not easy at all. So you do need lots of skills of imitation and partimento playing and diminution before doing that.
And for composition, do you how do you introduce multiple instruments and orchestration into perhaps you have like a partimento and then you want to realize it with a big orchestra kind of thing?
Well, of course, that depends on the level of the student. Of course, they have to have some knowledge of instrumentation, of orchestration. So in the Menti Party Academy, we don't have the time usually to go into this. But if the student already has some knowledge, of course, we can use that to create a setting for like a quartet or a quintet or an orchestra if they feel like. It depends, of course, in 1 or 2 weeks, of course, we do not have the time to do all this. For students who do not have this knowledge previously, it's difficult to get into that.
What are some common mistakes, in your opinion, when learning in this Neapolitan tradition, particularly in theory and in composition? What you're a teacher, what do you find are the common mistakes or the common struggles that students might have?
I see it is easier to teach to children who have no previous knowledge, I have to say.
Oh.
because mainly in like at university, students come and they already do have some knowledge, of course. They know Roman numerals, they know maybe some harmony, some elements of harmony. And sometimes it's difficult to make them start think in another way, like in this partimento method, like using Arabic numbers and the chords. At the beginning, it's difficult to make them switch to this other method, but then they realize that it's actually easier. And when they come to this point and they see how this is easier and how it works better for the music of this time, they do it completely, and they just change their way of thinking of harmony. And I think that's cool. Yeah, but at the beginning it can be challenging.
Great. So basically your main thing is they have to unlearn a lot of stuff. Is that
no, what I say to my students, you don't have to forget that, because you will need this knowledge later. Of course, but you don't have to forget it. You just have to start thinking less in a vertical way, but in a horizontal way.
Well, I have a fun question. Who are your favorite Neapolitan composers? Give me 3.
3?
3.
Well,
3
Leo,
favorite.
of course. Leo is really underestimated because he has written such beautiful music.
Do you have? Can you give me some examples of Leo's music that you like?
Yeah, cello suites, cello concerto, I think is they really beautiful. Then we have Porpora, Nicola Porpora, of course, also beautiful church music. And yes, Durante, of course.
Do you have favorite partimenti, a particular partimenti that you like to use?
I love Leo's partimenti, which are not very easy at the beginning because they are quite advanced. But there is this concerto partimento, which is beautiful, which alternates soli and tutti, no? And it's really beautiful because you get to compose a piece for orchestra, as we said before, but to be played on a piano. And it's really, really cool.
Now, what is the future in terms of research? What can we look forward to in terms of partimento research? Maybe you can speak for yourself and also maybe what we see coming the next 5-10 years.
Well, as you said before, I'm writing my PhD thesis on the reception in France of partimenti. So all what we talked about before, I'm going, of course, deeper into analysis, and I will show many examples of how partimenti were treated. But of course, as I said, it's very difficult because all the sources are limited. we do not have many written sources. And what we have, they are basically just bases. So we know a lot about this now, thanks to the work of scholars like Giorgio Sanguinetti or Rosa Cafiero or Robert Gierdingen and others. Many others are working on this now. And we do know a lot of how how partimento was used and what it brought. So it's hard to say what will come next. It would be interesting. I think there are some people working on this in Germany. What happened in Germany? Because in Germany was a different kind of school, which was very similar to Partimenti, but it's the Generalbass, no? The school, Bach's school, no? The Thomaskirche in Leipzig.
Didn't Bach read like a lot of Italian scores? Didn't he buy like Durante scores or something?
It could be. I don't know.
I read that somewhere. Sure. I can't remember. But I know he bought Vivaldi's scores, right? And he was studying that.
Yes, it absolutely could be. As I said before, Italian musicians were really famous at the time and really well known for their skills and their talents. So it was quite normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now for last two questions. The second last one is, you're a professor of music theory. Where does Partimenti or Partimento or Neapolitan theory stand now in the modern age? And is it applicable to the 21st century? And we know that it definitely is perfect for understanding the 18th century, but is it applicable for contemporary music?
Well, if you're talking about contemporary music, it's very difficult because there is no tonal music anymore. So it's quite difficult to apply.
It's hard to apply the rules of tonal music when there's no tonal music.
Exactly. So yeah,
let me then switch the question now to music education now. And so, how would you say this is good training for if you could reform music education? How would you reform it?
Well, actually, since I started teaching here in Lugano together with my colleagues, we decided to introduce a small partimento exam. So our students were a bit shocked when we told them, but it's actually very useful for them. So what we do is we introduce small partimento lessons into our music theory lessons. So a part of the traditional harmony exercises, our students have to learn all the rules and the piano, of course, and they will have to play the rule of the octave in all positions and tonalities, and then they will have to improvise on a small bass. So we are introducing this as a kind of experiment right now because we see that it does help a lot in many ways of understanding music and listening to music, and it helps their composition skills and everything. So we did introduce this, and I created a small course for my students where each week we have new material they have to practice on, and let's see what happens.
Wonderful. I think it's great. I actually have a question that's just came to mind, which is, if you've never composed for most of your childhood and you never got the chance like these Neapolitan kids who started very young, can you learn to compose even if you're an adult? Is it something that older people can try?
Yeah, of course. Anybody can try. If you're willing to learn, of course, you have to practice. That's for everybody. Everybody has to practice if they want to learn music, no? But I think anybody can start with regole and Feneroli's Partimenti and regole, which are very good because they contain all the regoles and you have exercises for those rules. And just slowly just be kind to yourself. Don't be in a hurry and just practice. And I think anybody can do it if they want to.
Fantastic, very uplifting, and gives hope to a lot of people. So the great Professor Lydia Carlisi, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your very fascinating research on the French reception of Partimento and all the great work you do. The Menti Party, which is really a fantastic summer program. I really hope more people know about it and we can promote it more so that more people know about Partimento and the fine work that you and your colleagues are doing in this movement. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really hope you had a good time yourself. And please, perhaps when your thesis is out, come back, or your dissertation, come back and let's talk about that again.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you do, because it's very important that we talk about our work too.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Carlisi.
Thank you.